and welcome to the very first video in the series Q&A, Questions and Answers. My name is Dan Gibson, and today we want to examine a question that viewers have asked about the Romans. If, as I suggest, Petra is the original holy city of Islam, then it is much closer to the Roman army. Indeed, it's in the Roman territory. So why do we not hear about the Romans earlier? Why doesn't the Roman army interfere earlier on in the process? It's a good question, and I've been investigating it for a number of months now, collecting some different materials. Some of the books, just to give you an example of what I go through, The Byzantine Wars by John Haldon. It's a very good book. Ordered that and got it. Someone suggested I get this one, the Osprey book, Yarmouk, AD 636, by David Nicole. And actually, David Nicole writes a very good book there. A brand new book out, The Function of the Roman Army in Arabia Petraea, by Mariana Castro. Brand new book, just came out 2018. Very good book. Plus, I have in my electronic library, I have thousands and thousands of books. And so just to give you an example, Archaeology of Jordan by Burton MacDonald and Russell Adams. I have Byzantium and the Arabs in the 5th century by Irfan Shahid, and books like that. Plus a lot of different academic papers that have been written, and I've downloaded them on the internet over the years. And so over 10,000 different sources that I can look at when I want to search a topic. When I looked up Muta, the battle, pages and pages of stuff come up where it's mentioned. So it was lots of resources to go through. So if Petra is the holy city of Islam, why weren't the Romans upset earlier? Here are 10 or 11 things to consider. First of all, Mohammed was a preacher, and he would have had the support of the Roman Byzantines as long as he preached monotheism to the polytheists. This is why when he was persecuted by the polytheists, his followers moved off to Abyssinia, which was also a Christian area, but it wasn't Byzantine, and so he found some support there. Muhammad later moved to Medina, that was in 622, where his main opponents were the Jews. Now, the Christians and the Jews did not get along. Tension was building in the Byzantine Empire. 8 years after Muhammad and his followers moved to Medina, the Byzantine Emperor, Heraclius, he decreed that all Jews must convert to Christianity. So you can see why Muhammad felt free to physically attack the Jews and put pressure on them, because the Jews had confronted him about his teaching and claiming that his teaching was not according to the Jewish scriptures. And at that point, Muhammad had not clashed with the Christians, so he clashed with the Jewish people there in Medina. Third point, the Byzantine Romans were at war with Persia in the east and the tribal people in the north. Their army was divided into multiple sections. Europe was a major struggle. The Slavs were pressing in from the northeast, so the Balkans were a major area of struggle. In the east, the Persian armies were continually attacking the armies coming in, 40,000 men at a time. In North Africa, there was also struggle. And so there was a struggle in Egypt between the Copts and the Byzantines. And so the Byzantines, they ruled with an iron fist in Egypt, and they taxed the Egyptians, and they taxed them, and they taxed them. So the Roman army was very busy, and Arabia wasn't on their minds. The Byzantine Romans, this is number 4, paid support to Arab tribes in southern Syria and especially in Jordan to police the borders with Arabia. Hundreds of years earlier, the great Roman Empire had constructed forts and limes, these are walls along this area, and roads through this area. And so those forts were utilized by the local Arab tribes who defended the southern border of the Byzantine Roman Empire. So the army could be somewhere else. Besides, other than intermittent raids, the tribes of Arabia had never launched a full-scale attack from Arabia into that area. There was also this is number 5, there was no well-defined border with Arabia. Remember, much of Arabia was occupied by nomadic tribes who were often raiding each other rather than attacking well-fortified defended positions. Hundreds of years earlier, the Romans had utilized the limes or the lines of defense, but now the area more had forts or castles, and they would go out from these points. Number 6, the Arabs were known as agriculturalists and merchants. Camels were used for moving goods. The tribes were poorly armed. This is why, at the Battle of Badr, the Quraysh asked the Romans for arms, swords, spears, shields, mail armor, and so forth, so they could defend themselves. The Battle of Badr is significant because those arms fell into the hands of the Muslims. I am sure this raised an alarm in the Byzantine world. Number 7, the Battle of Badr, as we had shown in video number 10 in the series Archaeology in Islam, it was fought north of Petra. This was a very daring raid deep into Byzantine territory, and it would have alarmed everyone. There was something different happening. In order to mobilize, several things had to happen for the Byzantines. First of all, those Arab tribes defending the Romans had to meet and agree, and they had to organize themselves against a major threat. B, for this point, they would have needed to send delegations off to the Romans. They would have had to work their way up the chain of command, up the hierarchy, to convince them that there was a growing threat in the south. Remember, the south had never risen, and so this is going to be a difficult task, and I'm sure that the Romans encouraged the Arab tribes to just deal with these bandits down from Medina. They're attacking around Medina. You deal with them. So first in 625, a small Arab army left the Petra region, which was called Mecca in the records. You'll see this in video number 5, and that is called the Battle of Uhud. And so the first battle that takes place. Then next in 627, the Arab armies march again out, reaching Medina, but this time Mohammed and his men have dug a ditch across the northern part of the city, defending it against the Romans who are coming down from the south. They're not called Romans; they're simply called the tribes coming out of Mecca. Okay, so remember, Mecca was known as Petra at this time. We've shown that in our earlier videos as well. So where were the Romans? Well, it becomes clear that the Arab tribes were the agents of Rome. This is the 8th item I want you to notice, and that is, and I'm sure that it wasn't until this book by Mariana Castro that it really came clear to me that there was no military presence of Romans in Petra. They're all over the place. She lists a couple hundred places where there are Roman forts and everything else, none in the city of Petra. At least we haven't discovered them to this date. So no major military presence in the city that we know of. It was truly a religious city. Oh, there were Roman soldiers and officials who were buried in Petra, but no big barracks and no big fortifications there that we can find. Now, remember, Petra at this time was not the capital city of the Roman province, Petria. That was in Bosra, in southern Syria. So the Roman soldiers were in Bosra, in the capital, but Petra in the south was just policed by local tribes, the Quraysh among them. So when the Quraysh marched into Arabia, they would have gathered fighters from the surrounding tribes. At Uhud, there were only 3,000 soldiers and 200 cavalry. That would be on the Roman side. And at the Battle of the Trench, the armies arrived with, the Muslim accounts tell us, about 10,000 soldiers. This number may have been exaggerated. It's hard to tell. And when we come to Muta, the next big battle, there might have only been a handful of Roman actual soldiers there. The vast majority would have been local tribesmen, and along with them pressed farmers and even city dwellers. So they would have gathered as big as they could get. Al-Tabari says somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000. He doesn't give us a good number. Professor Walter Kagi, who estimates there might have been 100,000 soldiers in the entire Roman army. That includes the Balkans and over in Persia and over in all the various places that they were, which included Italy and North Africa and so forth. So maybe they gathered together 10 or 20,000 on the Roman side, and there were about 3,000 on the Muslim side. After all, who can count in the middle of a battle? There is no official record on the Christian side, so we go by what the Muslims say, but recognize maybe the numbers were a bit inflated. That brings us to number 9. There were no official Roman Byzantine army records of the Battle of Muta. It doesn't exist. When I'm going through this book here by Haldon, he doesn't even mention Muta. It doesn't appear in the records that he's following through of the Byzantines. So obviously that army at Muta was not under Roman control, but under the Arab tribes that was there. It was an Arab-controlled army. Number 10, when the Romans do come on the scene, the emperor, he builds a wall from Gaza over to the south end of the Dead Sea, and he builds that wall there, and that's where they draw the line against Arabia. So along comes Abu Bakr a couple years later, and he's trying to convince the Arab tribes to join him, and so he just looks and says, let's just go into Egypt then. So the army marches into Egypt. They also march north. As they're going north, he convinces the local tribes, saying, did you see that comet in the sky? There was this great earthquake, and then a curved sword-looking comet went across the sky, and he said, that's an omen that we are here. And so the tribes in Syria and in parts of Jordan, some of them join with him, and so his army begins to grow. The real battle takes place in Yarmouk in northern Jordan. And that we have the book here, and it describes that battle in 636. So, the Arab tribes are acting on behalf of the Romans. And since we're looking at Petra in the Roman area, as the tribes come down, even as the Quraysh come down, they're acting on behalf of the Romans. So the Romans are involved. It's just not under Roman name. We only hear the local tribal names. Okay? And they're the Byzantines. Their armies are far away. They're spread thin all around the empire. So, if we consider Petra as the original holy city of Islam, history makes even more sense if we're talking about Petra. The Roman Byzantine history fits the Petra story better than it fits the Mecca story in Arabia. Now, one more thing, just to note that the Bedouin of Arabia developed something new just at the coming of Islam. Originally, the Arabs in Arabia used camels for carrying trade items. They didn't ride their camels. They walked beside the camels. The camels carried these burdens. But eventually, the so-called Southern Arabian saddle was replaced by a saddle with a wooden frame. And this wooden frame could be put onto the top of the hump, not on the back side of it, and that would give an effective platform from which soldiers could fight. This meant that the new Muslim armies could move quickly through the desert. The Byzantine army marched on its feet. It was supported by a small number of cavalry, but it was infantry. They moved slowly. The Arabs, on the other hand, were all mounted. They could move quickly, maneuver around armies. They could fight a totally different kind of battle than what the Byzantine foot soldiers were used to. This upset the balance of power in the Middle East, and the Roman army struggled to resist this new kind of warfare. They did a good job, but in the end, the Muslims swept across the desert much faster than the slow-moving foot soldiers of the Romans. Now, if you have not been following from the very beginning what we've been talking about here with Petra and Mecca, then the documentary film The Sacred City is a good place to start. Watch that, then watch the series Archaeology and Islam, and that'll catch you up into what we're discussing here. I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been the first video in the series Questions and Answers. I have over 100 emails on my computer that need answering from viewers who have written in, and I will attempt to answer some of those questions in future videos in this series.